So this whole situation with, RFK Jr. being confirmed as, HHS director has obviously created mixed reviews all over the place. We saw smear campaigns for a really long time leading up to this. People calling out his credentials, is he the right guy for the job, all these different things. And, similar to this current moment, there's a whole group of people that see this as a beautiful step in the direction of progress, and they're open-minded to see what's going to happen. And then yet the total opposite on the other side where, hey, this is the biggest disaster to public health that is ever going to happen. Two very, very different perspectives. I'd love to get you guys' take on what's going on.
Yes, I had a chance to catch some of Kennedy's address to the Department of HHS as he took over. And one thing that struck me was his the emphasis he places on transparency. I think he said, "My goal is to be so transparent that you don't even need to file a Freedom of Information request." And I thought that was striking because we've been living in such an environment of secrecy and such an environment of sort of hiding the ball, particularly with Anthony Fauci and people like Francis Collins at the helm, to where it just created such distrust. So I think putting sunshine on a department like the HHS and letting the people see what's going on behind the scenes will go a long way to increasing trust. And Bobby even quoted his uncle JFK, who has, I think, one of the most powerful quotes in presidential history, when JFK said, "The very word secrecy is repugnant in an open society." And that alone to me is encouraging, and I'm going to hold Bobby to that standard because he's put that standard on HHS that it's going to be that transparent. And what I would say is to people who are super concerned and think this is going to lead to even more disastrous health outcomes for Americans, I would say we're already in a dire strait when it comes to health outcomes compared to peer nations. America is almost rock bottom in a lot of key categories, from cancer rates to chronic disease, to um, how many even autoimmune disorders people are dealing with on an average basis. And I think to illustrate this, let's look at the pandemic. So the United States is about 4 or 5% of the population, yet we suffered during COVID about, I think, 16 to 17% of the deaths. So disproportionately, Americans died throughout the pandemic more than other nations, even other nations that don't nearly have the wealth or the alleged infrastructure that we have. So there's something going on with health in the United States. And by the way, a lot of people will say, "Oh, it's the vaccine. People, that's why people were dying, or it's COVID and this and that." But the United States actually had lower vaccination rates compared to peer nations, certainly in Europe, but higher death rates. So what I like about Bobby's approach is he seems to be wanting to look at 10 to 12 environmental factors in our environment that he believes, as a hypothesis, are responsible for the chronic disease, the autism, the proliferation of health issues and autoimmune disorders that Americans have disproportionately been burdened with compared to peer nations over the past 50 years. And what I would say is, why not try something different? Because the orthodoxy that has been in place has not yielded results that anybody would be satisfied with. So that creates an environment where a disruptor is needed. And I think what people also forget about Bobby Kennedy, as he's been sort of politicized as this evil figure from people on the left, is that look at his history with river keepers. Look at his history as one of the most accomplished environmental lawyers in the United States, who went after big polluters, was instrumental in cleaning up the Hudson River. I believe he can do that on a larger scale. And I think his focus, not just on vaccines, that's what everyone wants to talk about, but his focus on cleaning up our soil, our water, um, banning certain substances that Europe and even Canada bans, for example, because they're proven to be toxic to the human body. I mean, there's so much that needs to be done, and I think Bobby's the right man at the right time to do it. And I say, before you cast judgment and say it's going to be the worst thing ever, give him a chance to see what he's going to do. At least give him 6 months. And this gets back to our previous discussion, where are we leaving the requisite space for people to actually engage in progress? And I think in the Trump administration, I'm a pretty vocal critic of a lot of things going on. I see Bobby Kennedy at HHS as a real bright spot.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. And I think this goes back to principles a little bit too, right? It's like, I think when push came to shove, before Kennedy kind of came on the scene, you could ask almost anybody, hey, does corruption and pharma lobbying, is this a big part of what decides health policy, medications made available, all these different things? You probably would have got everybody across the board to say, yeah, that's probably a big part of what's going on. But then enter Kennedy, and suddenly those principles go out the window for half the population, who say, oh, no, wait a minute, we don't want to stop corruption. We need a qualified person in there who is a doctor who knows what they're doing. But I mean, if corruption is the issue and lobbying is the issue, you want a lawyer, right? You want somebody who has a great background of holding power to, to accountability. And I see that as kind of the bright spot in this as well. And I think people are misreading the situation because they haven't correctly identified the problem. So I don't know, it's my thought. And Madhava, I know you come from obviously the medical background, and you have lots of colleagues, lots of people who have different feelings and perspectives on this. And you've obviously, worked with Kennedy's CHD at one point there, and, are very astute in the way you make sense of things when it comes to this stuff. So I'm very curious to hear your take.
What fascinates me the most, I think, is how poorly informed the medical orthodoxy is about this man, as well as the HHS and the history of the HHS. Never mind the data behind vaccines and links to autism, or perhaps no links to autism. And the first thing I want to say is here's a misconception coming from my colleagues who say that he's not qualified to run the HHS. As you alluded to, Joe, he's a very bright person who has sued polluters, and that requires an immense grasp of data. So he knows how to deal with data. But I want to bring up the point, which is, of the last 10 HHS secretaries, only 3 have had medical training. 7 have not. You have to go all the way back to I'm not sure who it was. I think it was around 2000 before you found a doctor who was running the HHS. We must not also diminish the power that the Secretary of the HHS has. He has control over $1.7 trillion, including billions and billions of dollars of grant money. So he's a very, very powerful person now. And the question is, why won't you let him do his job, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is, the power that this person has now is possibly unrivaled amongst all cabinet secretaries. I want to bring light to the fact that the Secretary of HHS in the beginning of 2020, during the pandemic, when the pandemic first sort of emerged on the planet, let's say, was this man named Alex Azar. He was not a doctor. He was, in fact, a pharmaceutical executive who worked for Eli Lilly at a very, very high level. I'm not sure how he got to that position, but it was, it should automatically say, why would you pick a pharma rep or a pharma exec to run an agency that's supposed to regulate pharma? But that's what we've been doing, or at least we did in that situation. And I have to make this point, which is being lost right now, is that on February 4th, 2020, this man, Alex Azar, stated that the United States security was under attack by weapons of mass destruction, which that terminology was expanded to include biological, chemical, and radiological warfare. By doing so, he instituted what's called the Emergency Use Authorization and the PrEP Act. The EUA, the Emergency Use Authorization, basically said that the regulatory agencies are not going to be rigorous in enforcing safety upon countermeasures. What are countermeasures? Well, the countermeasures against in this case, biological threat, which eventually turned out to be the mRNA vaccines. The PrEP Act offered immunity for any harm, any liability of harm of any person who was or entity that was used to produce the countermeasures, deploy the countermeasures, How could this person make that determination on February 4th, 2020? There was not a single COVID-19 death in the entire country, and there was only several hundred deaths around the world. Moreover, how did he know that this particular virus was going to become a global threat? Why didn't the American people know that we were under attack? So my point here is that the HHS has been weaponized against the American people in the past. And the idea that we have now a truly informed skeptic of everything, including vaccines, is monumentally important. It doesn't matter where you're coming from right now, because if this person, Bobby Kennedy, is offering us radical transparency around the data, as David, as you said, you don't have to get a FOIA request anymore. It's going to be out in the open. Why is he doing that? Well, he's doing that because he understands the importance of regaining faith in the medical orthodoxy. Because what is going to be the value of some future treatment or regimen that is remarkably transformational in terms of our health, really, really safe, if nobody wants to take it? It won't do any good. So you need to have a skeptic, and you need to have an informed skeptic at the helm. That's the only way through this. What really stuns me, actually, is how the medical community is doubling down on the idea that this person is unqualified and that this person has no good intentions. If they were true to their mission and their credo, they would demand transparency. The fact that they're arguing against transparency is not going to play well for them in the future, because the public is a lot smarter than they give people credit for. And they're demonstrating that they're ignorant of so many different things. And what's interesting here is I've tried to write an op-ed for a platform called Doximity, which is a networking platform for doctors and medical professionals. After I was reading a op-med, they call them, about the danger of Kennedy as being HHS secretary, basically this author was calling for the AMA to step in and say something like, we need to get this guy out of here and make sure people don't trust him. Like the lack of understanding about the entire history, let's say, of vaccines, because that's really what this person was talking about, is like, oh my gosh, he's an anti-vaccine nut job. The reality is that this very, very tight liability shield given to vaccine manufacturers that happened in 1986. Why did that happen? Well, it's because organizations like the American Medical Association agreed that vaccines are unavoidably unsafe. That was their determination. This is our organization. We said that 40 years ago. And because they're unavoidably unsafe, this allowed the National Immunization Vaccine Act to come into effect, which basically says vaccine manufacturers can't be sued. It doesn't mean you can't sue for damages, but you're suing the U.S. government, not the vaccine manufacturers. That is the medical statement. This came from our own organizations, completely lost on this person. Now, all Kennedy has to do, honestly, and this is what he said he's going to do, which is the most important things. One is to get the pharma lobby from being able to advertise on broadcast news, broadcast channels. Do people understand that when you see Pfizer commercials that are saying, ask your doctor if you have psoriatic arthritis to try this new drug, that they're not making hundreds of millions of dollars off of that ad? No, there's not going to be 8 million people who say, oh my God, I want the new treatment and I'll pay anything for it. They're not selling product. They're selling good media coverage. This is extremely important to get rid of. This happened since 1997. There's no other country, I think, except for New Zealand, that allows pharmaceutical companies to advertise like this. Get rid of that. What happens when we get rid of the liability shield that vaccine manufacturers have? Guess what they're going to do? They're going to test their vaccines like they test their medicines, because they can get sued for their medicines and not for vaccines. That's all you have to do. They'll do the proper testing. Why are we saying that you don't have to do the testing if you're making vaccines? They're going to do everything possible to avoid spending hundreds or tens of billions of dollars in damage payments. And the way to do that is to actually test the vaccines properly. That's why they're not doing it. So we can excuse where we were 40 years ago, or 39 years ago in 1986, when there was only 12 shots on the CDC's immunization schedule, and there was no explosion of chronic disease. Now we're giving our kids over 70, and we have an explosion of chronic diseases. What does that mean? Well, that means that they're correlated. That doesn't mean that they're causally related. But do you understand that if they were causally related, that is exactly what we'd be seeing in the data? Exactly. So to all my colleagues out there in medicine who are groaning at the idea that Kennedy is now the head of public health, step up, people. Let's get to the answer. Let's get to the bottom of things. Put everything down and let's find the answer. When you say that you don't want to do that, you are destroying what little trust the public has in what we do as physicians. So this is a call to all my doctor friends out there. It's take a closer look at what's going on, because you're going to be on the wrong side of history. And it is very unfortunate, sadly, that his confirmation vote went along political party lines.
Yeah.
Because that is going to be politicized. It's going to be like, oh, it was the Republicans that want this crazy guy. It's because of Trump. Look, the reality is that there was not a single senator in the Senate, I would suggest, that has the capacity to judge this person based on science. They actually don't know. And it is a testament, actually, to President Trump's sway over his political party that he got the votes for Kennedy, except for Mitch McConnell. So the Senate got it right, but not for the right reasons. So, this is an appeal to all of us to let the person do his job. And if you're against transparency, then, I would ask you to explain what you're actually for.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also like that Kennedy said everything's on the table. He's going to look at everything. And, he seems to have the intellectual curiosity and also the desire to really get to the truth that I think is encouraging. But to Madhava's point, I remember looking at some data about CBS throughout the pandemic, and the guest with the most appearances, I think, from 2020 to 2023 was Scott Gottlieb. And Scott Gottlieb is a Pfizer executive. And what was interesting, and also he was, under Trump, by the way. And what was interesting is that you would watch CBS and Face the Nation, and they'd come back from commercial break and it'd be like, this clip sponsored by Pfizer. And then, now our next guest, Scott Gottlieb, talking about vaccines, particularly the Pfizer vaccine. It's like, everyone needs to get this booster. It's the most, it's going to protect you. It's going to be the best thing ever. And it's like, are people not questioning if there's some kind of conflict of interest here? Is everyone just assuming that a serial felon like Pfizer is just completely has our best interest at heart? There's no profit motive here. There's nothing to look at. And it's amazing to me how many people just didn't see that conflict of interest. And what's been paramount to Bobby when he ran for president was looking at the corporate capture in a lot of our agencies. And I don't think it's more pronounced than the pharmaceutical industry and vaccine manufacturers hold over HHS and public health. So I think what's interesting to me is to look at what is Bobby going to do? And when he actually does these studies, are people going to accept them? And that can go on all different directions, meaning if the study is transparent, and this should get to a point where people can hopefully agree that this is a good study, right? That the fundamentals are sound, that this is a study that is free of outside influence and undue influence that could prejudice the result. But the result of that is going to be interesting, because our people who think that every single vaccine is just 100% infallible and everyone should take every single one, if there's a study that shows actually this vaccine may have more risk than benefit, are they going to accept that and say, maybe we should revise this vaccine schedule? But similarly, let's say that they do a study on the measles vaccine and Kennedy's conclusion is actually, as he said under his confirmation hearing, I support this vaccine. I would give it to my kids. I think kids should get it. are the people in the health freedom movement space, how are they going to respond to that? Right? So it's like, how are people going to respond when probably, if we're being honest, if he's doing a deep dive on this, there's probably going to be mixed results. There's probably going to be some results to where some vaccines are more dangerous than people thought, and some vaccines are maybe not as dangerous as people thought. And how are people from these different factions going to respond to that? Are we going to actually be able to come to a consensus and say there's valuable information being shared here, or is it just going to be weaponized? All the study was bogus. He's trying to prejudice the results. Bobby Kennedy has an interest in, vaccine manufacturers getting sued, so he's not a neutral voice in this either. Or are people going to say, yeah, actually this is new information that comes to light that we should bring in to our collective understanding and use it to inform us to make different policy decisions. So that's what I'm really curious to see. But I think that Kennedy is somebody who is in this for the right reasons, in my opinion. I think that he is going to get to work, and I think he has the ability, has the intellectual curiosity, and has the requisite background to really make an impact. And I just hope that Trump is going to allow him to do that, and that he's going to not try to get Bobby to basically protect what he did for Operation Warp Speed because it's part of his legacy, for example, or do something that is going to make a decision Trump made during his first term look reckless. So that'll be interesting to watch.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
Yeah. Well, go ahead,
I
Joe.
was just going to say, it almost feels to me like, if you're a person on the ground, because obviously, we don't have our hands on the lever of what Kennedy does and, what studies are done and all that kind of stuff. But, we're obviously creating culture and we're creating conversation and we're listening to what's going on out there. And, if you want to be a true change maker in a sense, it's like, get out of the propaganda of your political side. Be there to actually listen to what comes forward from the science, actually think critically, be in it for the truth, be in it for what actually emerges and not just, well, my team says this or my team says that and, whatever it is, right? Because, at the end of the day, there is always going to be this elitist invitation to believe one narrative or another, one piece of propaganda or another. And, if we really want to be a culture that is not, driven by, foolishness, it comes upon ourselves to actually have to say, you know what, I'm not just going to believe whatever I'm told, and I'm actually going to come in good faith and want to understand. And I think to the points that you guys are both making, Kennedy actually is the guy that has the greatest opportunity of doing that. And I know some people are going to disagree with that, and I would say take a closer look, and you'd probably think differently. But that again involves having to step out of your narrative and the way you've been propagandized, right? But yeah, Madhava, you wanted to say something?
I wanted to say, to go off what David said, how are we going to apprehend the studies that hopefully will come out coming from a Kennedy HHS? Are we going to believe them, or are we going to say this is the work of a Trump operative, so we shouldn't believe what the new HHS studies show? Now, the question is, honestly, and this again is from my medical colleagues, who I'm going to group you into the medical orthodoxy who are against Kennedy's nomination and appointment. If you're already saying that you're against him, you're saying that you're against transparency. So to the discerning person, the discerning average person, if you now come out against the findings that Kennedy will have in the future, depending on what they show, if they show a link, let's say, or a very small link, a small causal link or something like that, how much credibility do you have if you already started off saying that you don't want to look? So you're doing a lot of damage to your credibility from the jump if you're against transparency. You don't have to be for Kennedy, or you don't have to think that he's a good guy. You can call him an ex-heroin addict, whatever you want to. But if you're not supportive of transparency, then your opinion with regard to what the results are is should not be trusted. So I'm asking all of my colleagues to be very careful with how they are talking about this person, especially publicly. Now, I wanted to add one thing. I submitted this op-ed as a physician who supported Kennedy to this platform, and I got actually a response back from the editor saying, it's a very good essay, but we we think that it's not for us because we would prefer that you didn't rehash what happened during COVID. And what they're saying there is very interesting because I was coming at it from this perspective. It's like, look, I'm a physician just like you guys are. And this is the reason why I left my practice to go work for Bobby Kennedy. It's because of what I was seeing during COVID. Here are all the obvious mistakes that were being made. Obvious mistakes. All you have to do is go look. All of the claims of efficacy based on the Pfizer vaccine, they cannot be substantiated. We did all the wrong things. And therefore, Bobby Kennedy was the only person who had a platform that was saying what I thought. And that's why I threw whatever abilities I had behind his position. And they're saying, no, we don't want it. We don't want you to talk about that. What they're really doing is they're hamstringing my arguments, right? Because I wanted to come at it with data, and they want to make it into a piece that's about like, oh, well, I believe Bobby's a good guy, and let's give him a chance. It's like, no, there's actually, substantiated, concrete evidence that he was right and you guys were wrong, but you don't want your readership to know that, and so the propaganda continues, and that's what is disappointing to me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's well said. And I think that's a good point that we really need to be able to bring to the table on all discussions, not just this one, but is that there, in some cases, we need to be able to sit long enough to see all the evidence, because in some cases we know enough evidence does tell us that, yeah, certain positions are in fact wrong. Or at least there's a significant amount of uncertainty in certain positions. And if we're not willing to look at the evidence long enough, then yeah, we can always just sit there saying, well, that's your truth, or this is my truth, or that's your opinion, and whatever. And it seems as though even in the medical orthodoxy that it isn't about the science, right? It isn't about the evidence. It's about having an opinion. And that's obviously a problem.
I do want to say this, though. It also does depend on the quality of the study, right? We can't just say the study is going to be perfect because Kennedy's running it now. I mean, I think there's legitimate questions as to whether the studies he's going to do are going to be completely free of bias, meaning if he appoints Steve Kirsch or Robert Malone to do the study, I mean, of course there's going to be, there's going to be outrage and people are going to question it. I think Kennedy has to be very careful to uphold the highest level of fidelity to these studies that he's going to do. And I think he will do that. But I don't think we can just presume that the study is going to be 100% perfect, until he actually does it.
The reality is, like, look, who is going to validate the study? That's what I'm saying, is that if the AMA comes out and says, oh, the study is bullshit and it's wrong and too many confounders, why would you trust them is what I'm saying. Like, who are we?
Yeah.
I'm putting us all in the same group. Like, I'm not a genius, a statistician or a data cruncher. I can do a little bit, but the world has to decide if the study is valid or not, and who is the arbiter of that. And this is where I'm saying is that this is where we use discernment, right? If the AMA is coming out right now and saying, well, Kennedy is a lunatic, before looking at the data, now their credibility in judging the study is now diminished, is what I'm saying. So everything that's happening right now in advance of what the data shows is important, because how are you going to know who to trust about the study? We don't know.
Right. Oh, I just think there's an irony to, and for good reason, a lot of people have discounted the studies the CDC and HHS has conducted before. And now that Kennedy's there, it's like a different group of people are going to be distrusting the studies. So it's like, yeah. I hope what Kennedy does is, before the studies are done, put together a committee and a commission to say, okay, what would we need to do in order for us to have relative agreement on the quality of this study, so that people can have some confidence regardless of the results. This is a methodology. This is how it's going to be conducted. It's going to be free of conflict of interest. And can people at least come to some kind of consensus to say, okay, we're going to live with the results, whatever they are? I don't know. I don't know if people have the capacity to do that in this environment.
Well,
but
I was just going to say,
ahead.
All parties have to come in good faith. And I think this is the hard part. I agree with you. It would be amazing if they put together a bit of a committee to say, how can we show as clear as possible that we're coming in good faith? But if the media doesn't come in good faith, if the medical orthodoxy doesn't come in good faith, if the general public who's going to just believe whatever they want to believe doesn't come in good faith, then we're not actually trying to make sense together. We're just playing games, right? And so
Right.
I think the spirit of what you're saying is great, and I agree he's got to do that. But if the other people don't want to play the game, then that's not up to him.
Right.
Look,
For sure.
I want to say this. Okay, let's just look at the medical orthodoxy. Think about how much they have on the line right now with regard to the data, like the real data, not these cherry pick studies that show, well, there looks like there is some kind of correlation between autism or neurodevelopment disorders and vaccine load, but there's too many confounders. What if we're looking at tens of millions of records that show a clear sign? Okay, I'm not saying that that's what they're going to show, but if it did, do you think the medical orthodoxy and all of these medical schools and journals have been saying that there's no link, we know that for sure, how are they going to reconcile the fact that they've been spewing information with, extreme confidence and now are wrong?
Yeah,
I would say that they have an enormous conflict of interest in the outcome already.
sure.
And they're doubling down on it over and over again. It's like, well, there can't be, there's no link. We've proven it. Like even, the doctors I'm talking to is like, oh, it's been proven there's no link. No, it hasn't been proven that there's no link. You can't prove that there's no link. It is a epistemological blunder to say we have proof that there's no relationship. So, because
I,
there
I
always could be a relationship, but you haven't defined it yet. So a lot of it is going to come down to how big the signal is, if there is one. And if it's a very small signal, the question is, why would you trust a medical bureaucracy that has so much to lose by admitting they were wrong? I'm not saying that they won't, come clean. I'm just saying that, look, if you're going to look at Kennedy as saying, oh, he's an anti-vaxxer, and of course he's going to come up with some, slanted study that shows that there's a link. What about the medical orthodoxy that has been telling, the pediatricians that have been at this for 40 years saying, oh, no, you need to get your vaccines. You need to get the Hep B vaccine when you're 2 hours old. You need to get them all. How are they going to ever face the fact that there could be a link now? Do you think they really have the integrity to fess up? Or are they going to try and undermine the science itself? I have seen enough with my own eyes in the last 5 years to say, no, they should not be trusted with their opinion. I don't trust medical opinion right now, and they're going to have to come out and really, really demonstrate that they're after the correct analysis and not their idea of what is more convenient. So I would suggest right now that they have more to lose and very little to gain, right? Because they've already, controlled the narrative for 40 years saying that there's no link and that's what the public thinks. What are they going to gain by having like all of the study that says, oh yeah, you're right all along. There is absolutely no contribution to, let's say, the vaccine load and chronic disease. They haven't gained anything. They've always had control. So they have only something to lose, is what I'm saying here. And so as we approach this time where where they're going to throw in their 2 cents, be very careful with their opinion because they have too much conflict of interest right now to be trusted 100%.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I want to add to that is in the interest of steel manning, which we were talking about earlier. I want to ask you guys this. Isn't it also true, though, that Kennedy has a lot to lose if the results don't sort of validate what his entire career in the past few decades has been built upon with CHD? Meaning, doesn't he have pressure to effectuate a certain result too, in a sense? I mean, he's not coming into this. Let's say he does these studies and it shows he was wrong, for example. I mean, that would also be quite a bit for him to lose in terms of credibility. So I don't think he's free. All I'm saying is he's not free of any kind of pressure to effectuate a certain result either, which is where this gets tricky. Now, Kennedy's saying all the right things. I love what he's saying, and I love his approach. But I think you can't discount the fact that there is also pressure on Kennedy to come to a certain result here too. Is there not?
I don't think there is, David. And Joe, do you want to answer that first? But
I mean,
no, don't. I'm
I
going to answer it
will.
first. Go ahead.
I like, okay, I'll be quick here. I think there is some pressure, but I don't think it's anywhere near the scale that is on the orthodoxy. Reason why I say that is, at least from my perspective, and being in this space for such a long time, questioning and challenging different health outcomes and things like GMOs and environmental toxins, vaccines, all these different things. There's a group of people that have been doing that do not come from the extreme position that, these vaccines are complete and utter, like killing everybody. It's a depopulation agenda, blah, blah, blah. That's a different group of people. Those of us who've been in more of like hey, there's some big questions here. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of corruption going on. There's a lot of problems. We don't really know. We need to take a closer look. I mean, that's very different than saying vaccines for certain cause autism and vaccine. I mean, like even the complexity around the vaccine causing autism perspective is in some cases, right? In some cases, it seems to be pushing something over the edge. But in a lot of cases, it is also true that the autism spectrum is just getting larger, right? And is that because of vaccines? Probably not. But they're including more things into the autism spectrum. So it's a very complex issue that I think, again, there's a group of people, and I would put Kennedy in there, that they just kind of want to know what's going on. And that might differ from other people in the health freedom movement who have very extreme positions not based on evidence. And in those cases, I'd say they have a lot to lose. Like, for example, the people who believe there is no virus, if you look at the way they orient towards that question and the way that they've provided evidence, they have a ton to lose because they've insulted everybody who believes there's a virus, right? And so I don't see Kennedy in that same position.
I
agree.
100% agree with that. And let's get down to the nitty gritty of this. Like, what has Kennedy's position been? And this is where, again, he's been misinterpreted. Almost always, he says, we need the data and let's prove that they're safe. You don't see him saying, oh, I know that there's absolutely vaccines are causing autism. All vaccines are causing all kind. He's blurted out sometimes on rare occasions that, yeah, I think vaccines cause autism, but I want to see the data. There's that. So, and he's also, if you take him to his word, he wants to make people better and healthy. Like, is he really? That's his mission, not to be right. Moreover, he has not come out and said, all you doctors are stupid vaxxers and the medical orthodoxy is here to kill you. They're doing horrible things to you. That's what they're saying about him. Mm-hmm. He hasn't said that about anyone over there. He's saying, look, let's get to the answer together. So I would say there's very little for him to lose if there's no signal there. And look, I appreciate the question, which is a very good one. Is who has more to lose? Does he have zero to lose? I would actually say that, I believe that he wants people to be healthy, so he has nothing to lose. Same with me. Like, I'm a parent first and a doctor second. I want to be wrong. I hope that there's no link. All of my kids are completely compliant with the vaccine schedule, and knowing what I know now, I would not have vaccinated them. But I didn't know anything, so I hope I'm wrong. So, that's the way I see it. And also, he has not made the mistake that the other side has, which is to denigrate people who disagree with him. He's been very open in saying, look, I just want to get to the answer. So I would say he has very little to lose. And to be really realistic about, is there a link? We may not be able to see a signal given across 100 million kids. But to say that there is no child that has not suffered autism from an injection, absolutely false. We have so many individual cases of that happening where it is obvious that the vaccine caused a rapid decline in milestone development, milestone reaching, and an immediate change, permanent in their physicality and mental capacity. So they're obviously, some people, some kids are obviously prone to having this happen. And we also have mechanisms in place, even though we haven't defined every cause of autism. We know that, look, you look at the package inserts for vaccines, they all list encephalopathy as a potential side effect. What is that? That's an inflammation of the CNS, of the central nervous system of your brain, not from an infectious cause, but from an autoimmune system response. That's basically what autism is. I mean, that's generally what's considered. It's an inflammatory response. So to say that there could be none is ridiculous and unscientific. And so my guess is that there's going to be a correlation. But in honor of your question, David, which is not knowing what it's going to show, I'll reiterate that I think Kennedy has almost zero to lose, which is why I trust his opinion.
Yeah, linking back to sort of the original statement of this discussion, it's my view that Kennedy is more interested in getting to the truth than being right. And I do think, to be fair to what you guys are saying, I think the medical orthodoxy is more concerned with protecting their longstanding traditions and held beliefs and being right than getting to the truth.
Yeah.
So from that respect, I'm not saying that it's like equal, everyone has equal pressure. It's like, but there is some pressure on Kennedy.
Yeah.
But I think that I think he's in a good position to actually be in a position to get to the truth and say, I welcome dissent. And that's a huge part of this. He's welcoming of dissent and disagreement. And secondarily, he's going to be transparent. And those are two things we haven't had in government in these positions of power. And that alone should be celebrated. I just hope that we're going to enter a situation where the vast majority of good faith people can accept that the studies are going to be done properly, right? Because not everyone's going to agree with that. But if enough people do, then nobody should be afraid of orthodoxy being challenged. And nobody should be afraid of the results concluding that now we have a different understanding than we had 10 years ago. And we need to change policy based on that, right? So, so I'm encouraged by it, at the end of the day. But it's going to be very interesting to see now that he's in the position, right? It's not theoretical anymore. Now it's tough work to be done. And how's he going to navigate all that? It's going to be interesting to see.
Yeah, and I think throughout.
I think it's going to be easy, honestly. I think he just has to be transparent.
Yeah.
Put it out there, open source all of the data, make it, hide the identification information and put it out there.
Well, I think
that's
what's going to be difficult, just to clarify, is getting to the root causes of why we have the chronic disease epidemic. Why are our health outcomes so poor? Or why are we, despite the fact that we're spending more on healthcare than peer nations, but to have worse outcomes? What is the root cause of this? I think that's not going to be easy to get to.
And I think that's where he made a mistake, to be honest, because you're talking about trying to understand a complex system within a complex system. It's like near impossible. Like our scientific modalities don't set up for enough control factor. Like it's impossible to account for every single control factor to be able to get to a root cause. We can get closer using common sense. Like we can imagine that toxic load in an environment, toxic load in food, toxic load in air. Like we can use our common sense and say that all these things are bad. But if people are expecting there to be like a smoking gun that's just going to come out and say this is the root cause, I don't think that's going to happen. And I think that could have been where there's been a mistake in the way that they've set up this policy and what their 2-year goal is. That said, I think, again, common sense has to prevail here, where we have to just get out of this mindset of, well, we need the exact study to prove something that is so frigging obvious to any animal that would approach a toxic substance and say, of course, I'm not going to consume that. Yet here we are as humans going, well, I mean, how bad really is it? Right. And so this is where it's going to be tricky. And yeah.
Yeah, I agree, Joe. I don't think he's going to be able to do much in 2 years, reversing the chronic epidemic and diseases. In 2 years, no way. I mean, this has been decades in the making.
I mean, I come back to it and I say, until we can come in good faith towards these discussions legitimately, it's the problem is that, I made a post about the Dunning-Kruger effect not too long ago, and it was essentially saying that the less you know about the subject, the more you believe that the more certainty you'll have in your position, the more you start to realize you know less, and la di da di da. And these sorts of cognitive biases are often weaponized against people, and it becomes a replacement for truly understanding data. It's like, well, Madhava, you're an anesthesiologist, therefore, you must be wrong, right? But it's like, no, but look at the data itself, right? And I think until we can get to that point where good faith is a cultural thing that we're doing, we're just part of the problem. And I know it sounds extreme, but it certainly seems to be the case.
Indeed. And also, rallying behind a principle here would be bodily autonomy. It's like, regardless of your view, do you think somebody should be forced to take a medical intervention?
Yeah.
And, I always point to Japan because I studied their response to the pandemic, and I really thought it was exemplary. I mean, yes, they had high vaccine uptake, but it was completely voluntary. They said no, and they made a point, the government, saying nobody should be bullied into getting this, and people should only take it after informed consent. And people decided to take it by and large, but they weren't forced to take it. And I think Kennedy is going to stand for the principle not just of informed consent, but bodily autonomy. And people are concerned, like, oh, he's going to take away everyone's vaccines. I actually don't think he's going to do that. I think he's going to say, if you want to administer these vaccines, have at it. But we're not going to force people to do this. Although I do think there has to be a reexamination of the childhood vaccine schedule. I think, to me, there's clear signal there. And so we'll see. But it's going to be refreshing to see this approach, which has long been abandoned. And I think it's also ironic that one of the most powerful dissenting voices of the medical orthodoxy throughout the pandemic, and Tony Fauci and Francis Collins, is now at the helm. That's an unbelievable development that I think people should be encouraged by, because you always have the naysayers out there who say, oh, we can never see any kind of resignation in government. Nothing can ever be accomplished. We should just abandon it altogether. But here we have an example of a movement that was very profound in the United States that actually has resulted in Bobby Kennedy being the head of HHS. That is an unlikely and inspiring story of our national political discourse.
Yeah. Well said.
100%.
Yeah.
99.9%.
99.9%. That's it. Well,
yeah, 98% efficacy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's say that's it. That's all on this. And let's, as we've been discussing, let's see what he ends up doing and have the patience to give him some time and, and just go with what happens, But thank you, gentlemen, once again for your thoughts and wisdom on this. And
Indeed.
yeah, should be a good one.